There's a moment in every connection with an avoidant where something shifts, but nothing is said out loud. No announcement, no clear signal, no defining conversation. Just a quiet, almost invisible change in the way they move around you, the way they respond, the way they exist in the space between closeness and distance. And if you're paying attention, you feel it before you understand it. It's not dramatic, it's not obvious, but it's heavy, because what you're actually witnessing isn't confusion, it's decision. Not a quick emotional reaction, but a slow internal weighing of everything you are to them. Whether they move closer or disappear further. Whether you become something real or something they let go of without ever fully explaining why. And the hardest part is, they won't tell you they're deciding. You have to read it in the silence, in the small shifts, in the things that don't seem like much until you realize they mean everything. When an avoidant is making a big decision about you, it doesn't look like clarity on the surface. It looks like contradiction. But underneath that contradiction is one of the most important turning points you'll ever experience with them. It often starts in a way that confuses you more than it reassures you, because suddenly they become more consistent, but something about it feels different. Before, their presence might have been unpredictable, coming and going without warning, leaving you trying to piece together what it all meant. But now they're there more often. Messages come through with less delay. Conversations don't feel as abruptly cut off. There's a rhythm forming where chaos used to exist. And for a moment, you might feel relief. Like maybe this is what you've been waiting for. Maybe they're finally showing up in a way that feels stable. But if you look closer, the consistency isn't warm or effortless, it's controlled. It's almost like they're showing up with a purpose rather than a feeling. They're present, but not fully open. Engaged, but not fully relaxed. And that's because this isn't them falling naturally into closeness. This is them stepping into a space where they're trying to understand what you mean to them and whether they can handle what comes with that. The consistency isn't comfort, it's calculation. And that subtle difference is everything. As this shift continues, you begin to notice something else. The way they communicate starts to change. It's no longer just casual, reactive, or surface level. There's intention behind their words now. They choose what they say more carefully. You might notice that they respond in a way that feels more thought out, less impulsive. There's a certain precision in how they express themselves, like they're trying not to say too much, but also not too little. And this can feel confusing because on one hand, it seems like they're taking you more seriously. But on the other hand, it creates a sense of distance, like you're no longer interacting with their natural self, but with a version of them that's being filtered. That's because they are filtering. When an avoidant is making a big decision about you, they become highly aware of the impact of their words. They don't want to create expectations they're not sure they can meet. They don't want to open doors they might later feel the need to close. So every message, every response, every conversation becomes part of a careful balancing act. And while it may not feel emotionally expressive, it actually means you've moved into a space where they're taking the connection seriously enough to think before they act. Then comes one of the most subtle but revealing signs of all: the pauses. The moments where you can feel that they've seen your message, but they don't respond right away. Not in the way they used to, where the delay felt like disinterest or avoidance. This feels different. This feels like they're there thinking. You might even notice that when they do reply, their response connects more directly to what you said, almost like they took time to process it instead of just reacting. And those pauses can be uncomfortable because they leave space for your mind to wander, to question, to doubt. But what's actually happening in those moments is something deeper than avoidance. They're weighing their response. They're considering how much to reveal, how much to hold back, how their words might shape what happens next between you. It's not about ignoring you. It's about not wanting to move carelessly. And while that might not give you the immediate reassurance you crave, it tells you that you've reached a point where your presence is no longer something they can treat lightly. You matter enough for them to slow down. And just when you think you adjusted to that rhythm, another shift begins to surface. They start asking questions they never asked before. Not surface level questions, not the kind that fill silence or keep things easy. These questions carry weight. They reach a little deeper into who you are, how you think, how you feel about things that actually matter, and it might catch you off guard because it doesn't fully match the guarded energy they still carry. One moment, they seem distant, and the next, they're asking something that feels surprisingly personal, and that contrast can be confusing, but it's also one of the clearest signs that something is changing internally for them. Avoidants don't naturally move toward emotional depth unless there's a reason. And the reason in this case is that they're trying to understand you on a level that helps them make a decision. They're gathering pieces of who you are, not out of curiosity alone, but out of consideration. They want to know what being with you would actually feel like, what it would require from them, what it might cost them emotionally. And even though they may not fully open themselves in return, the fact that they're asking means they're stepping into a space where you're no longer just an experience, you're becoming a possibility. And then there's something even quieter, something you might not notice right away unless you're really tuned in. The way they look at you, not just physically, but emotionally, there's a stillness in their attention, a kind of quiet observation that wasn't there before. It's not intense in an obvious way, not overwhelming or overly expressive. It's subtle, but it's there. They're watching how you respond to things, how you handle moments, how you react to them. They're paying attention in a way that goes beyond surface interaction. And this can feel strange because it creates a sense that you're being seen more clearly, but not necessarily more openly. It's like they're taking everything in without immediately showing what they're thinking about it, and that's exactly what they're doing. When an avoidant is making a big decision about you, they shift into a mode of quiet evaluation, not in a cold or judgmental way, but in a way that reflects how seriously they're taking the situation. They're trying to understand if this connection is something they can step into without losing themselves, if it's something that aligns with what they're capable of handling. And while they may not say any of this out loud, their attention tells the story. Because people don't observe that closely unless what they're seeing matters more than they're ready to admit. By the time you've experienced these shifts, you may still feel uncertain about where you stand because nothing has been clearly defined, nothing has been confirmed. But the energy has changed in a way that's impossible to ignore. And that's the paradox of this moment. You're closer to an answer than you've ever been, but it doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like tension, like something is building beneath the surface, waiting to either move forward or fall apart. And in that space, it's easy to overthink, to question yourself, to wonder if you're reading too much into things. But what you're actually sensing is real. These aren't random changes. They're part of a process that avoidants go through when something starts to matter more than they expected it to. And while they may not express it in a way that gives you immediate comfort, their behavior is revealing something important. They are deciding slowly, carefully, and in their own way. And whether that decision leads them closer to you or further away, this phase is where everything begins to take shape. And just when you start to settle into trying to understand these shifts, something happens that feels almost contradictory to everything you've been noticing. They pull back, but not in the way you've seen before. This isn't the kind of distance that feels like disappearance, where everything goes cold and silent and you're left questioning if they've emotionally checked out. This is different. It's a slight step back, almost like they're creating space to breathe, but they don't let go of the connection entirely. They still respond. They still show up. They're still there, just not as close as they were a moment ago. And this can feel confusing, even frustrating, because it interrupts the sense of progress you thought was building. But what's really happening here isn't regression, it's pressure. The closer they feel to making a decision, the more aware they become of what that decision means. And for someone who struggles with emotional closeness, that awareness can feel overwhelming. So they instinctively create a little distance, not to leave, but to regulate, to think, to process what they're feeling without being consumed by it. And the fact that they don't disappear completely tells you something important. They're not trying to escape you, they're trying to understand if they can handle staying. As this push and pull continues, you may start to notice that their behavior doesn't feel random anymore. Before, their actions might have seemed inconsistent, unpredictable, almost like they were moving based on mood or impulse, but now there's a pattern forming beneath the surface. The way they respond, the way they show up, even the way they create distance, it all starts to feel intentional. Like there's a thought process guiding it. You might not always understand what that process is, but you can feel that it's there. And that's because they're no longer reacting without awareness. They're thinking about what they're doing, what it means, and where it might lead. Their actions become more measured, more controlled, almost like they're trying to avoid making a mistake they can't take back. And while that control can sometimes feel like emotional distance, it's actually a sign of something deeper. It means they're considering the impact of their choices. They're recognizing that what happens between you isn't something casual anymore. It has weight, it has consequence, and that awareness changes the way they move. At some point, something even more subtle begins to happen, something that you might not immediately recognize unless you're paying close attention. They start reflecting your words back to you. Not in an obvious or repetitive way, but in how they respond, how they frame their thoughts, how they reference things you've said in the past. It's like pieces of your conversations are staying with them, being processed, and then reappearing in a different form. And this can feel surprisingly meaningful because it shows a level of attention and retention that avoidants don't usually express openly. They're not just hearing you in the moment, they're carrying your words with them, thinking about them, trying to understand them, and more importantly, trying to understand how those words fit into their own internal world. This reflection isn't just about communication, it's about integration. They're taking what you've shared and using it to shape how they see the connection. And that only happens when someone is starting to take you seriously on a deeper level than they're used to. And as they move through this internal process, there's an energy that begins to build, one that you can feel, even if you can't fully explain it. It's like they're quietly weighing your importance in their life, not in a way that's visible or verbal, but in the way they engage with you, the way they prioritize certain interactions, the way they seem more present in moments that used to feel casual. You might notice that when they're with you, there's a kind of focus that wasn't there before. Less distraction, less detachment. It's subtle, but it's real. And underneath that focus is a question they're trying to answer for themselves. Where do you fit in their world? What does keeping you close actually mean? And can they allow that to happen without losing the sense of independence they've always relied on? These aren't easy questions for them. In fact, they can be deeply uncomfortable. But the fact that they're even asking them, even silently, means that you've reached a level of significance that goes beyond surface connection. You're no longer just someone they interact with. You're someone they're considering. And then there's a shift that can feel almost grounding compared to everything else. They stop reacting impulsively. The emotional swings, the sudden changes in tone, the unpredictable responses, they begin to settle. Not completely disappear, but soften. Their behavior becomes more steady, more controlled, less driven by immediate emotion. And this can feel like a relief because it brings a sense of stability that might have been missing before, but it can also feel a little distant, like something has been dialed back. And in a way it has, Because what you're seeing now is someone who is no longer acting purely on instinct. They're holding themselves back, not out of disinterest, but out of caution. They're trying to make sure that whatever they do next aligns with the decision they're moving toward. They don't want to send mixed signals. They don't want to create emotional momentum they might later have to break. So they slow themselves down. They become more deliberate. And while that might not feel as emotionally expressive as you'd hope, it's actually one of the clearest signs that something serious is happening internally. They're not just feeling anymore. They're choosing. And this is where things become even more complex, because while all of these signs point to something meaningful unfolding, they don't necessarily bring clarity in the way you want. There's still no direct answer, no clear statement of intention, no moment where everything is defined. Instead, you're left in this in-between space where the connection feels more significant than ever, but also more uncertain. And that uncertainty can be emotionally exhausting because it requires you to sit with the unknown while still feeling deeply connected to what's happening. You might find yourself analyzing every interaction, trying to understand what it means, trying to predict what comes next, and that's a natural response to this kind of dynamic. Because when someone is making a decision about you without saying it out loud, you're forced to read between the lines, to feel your way through something that isn't being clearly explained. But what matters here is recognizing that this phase, as confusing as it is not meaningless. It's not random. It's not something you're imagining. These shifts are real, and they reflect a process that avoidants go through when they're facing something that challenges their usual way of being. They don't rush into decisions. They don't express everything openly. They move slowly, carefully, often internally. And that can make it hard to feel secure while it's happening, but it also means that when they do reach a decision, it's not something they've taken lightly. So if you find yourself in this space where their behavior feels different but not fully clear, where their presence feels more intentional but still guarded, understand that you're witnessing something important. Not the final answer, not the resolution, but the process that leads to it. And while that process may not give you the certainty you want right now, it's shaping the outcome in ways that will eventually become clear. Because when someone who avoids emotional depth begins to move toward it, even in small, controlled ways, it means something has already shifted inside them, and that shift is where everything begins to change. And as this quiet process continues to unfold, something from the past begins to resurface in a way that feels almost unexpected. They start revisiting moments that once seemed closed, conversations that felt finished, situations that were left unresolved. It might come up subtly, woven into something casual, or it might appear in a more direct way that catches you off guard, but either way, it's not random. Avoidants don't naturally go back into emotional territory they've already escaped unless there's a reason strong enough to pull them there. And that reason, more often than not, is that they're trying to make sense of what happened before so they can decide what happens next. They're replaying interactions, not to dwell, but to understand, to see if something was misunderstood, or left incomplete. And when they bring these things back to the surface, it's not about reopening old wounds. It's about finding clarity in places where they once chose distance over depth, because now depth is exactly what they're being forced to face. And with that comes a shift in their overall energy, something that's hard to explain but impossible to ignore. There's a seriousness that wasn't there before, a kind of emotional weight that sits beneath even the simplest interactions. Conversations don't feel as light or effortless, not because something is wrong, but because something is being considered. It's like you're both standing at the edge of something unspoken, and even if you don't acknowledge it directly, you can feel it in the way they show up. Their tone, their timing, their presence, it all carries a sense of importance that goes beyond the surface. And this can feel intense, even a little intimidating, because it creates the sense that something is about to change, that things can't continue in the same undefined way they have been. And that's because internally, they've reached a point where staying in that undefined space no longer feels comfortable. They're approaching a turning point, whether they admit it or not. But even as they move closer to that point, they don't dive in all at once. Instead, they begin to test the emotional waters in ways that are so subtle you might miss them if you're not paying attention. They might share something slightly more personal than usual, something that reveals just a little more about how they feel or how they think. But as soon as that vulnerability appears, it's often followed by a shift back into control, a change in tone, a slight pullback, a return to safer ground. And this push and pull can feel confusing because it creates a pattern where you're given a glimpse of something deeper only to have it quickly covered again. But what's really happening is that they're experimenting with closeness in a way that feels manageable to them. They're trying to see what it feels like to open up, even just a little, without fully losing the emotional boundaries that protect them. And every time they do this, they're learning something about you, about themselves, and about what this connection might require from them if they choose to stay. At the same time, you may begin to feel something shift within yourself, something that's hard to put into words, but deeply emotional. It starts to feel like you're being quietly evaluated, not judged in a harsh or critical way, but observed with a kind of intention that goes beyond casual interest. You might notice that they pay closer attention to how you respond to certain things, how you handle moments of tension, how you express your needs or your boundaries. And this can create a sense of pressure, even if it's not spoken, like your actions carry more weight than they did before. And in a way they do, because when an avoidant is making a big decision about you, they're not just looking at how they feel in the moment, they're looking at what being with you would actually mean in a real, lasting sense. They're trying to understand if the connection is something they can sustain, something that fits into their life without overwhelming them. And while that process may feel distant or analytical at times, it's actually rooted in something much deeper. It's about whether they believe this connection is safe enough and meaningful enough to take the risk of staying. And then comes one of the most emotionally complex signs of all. They show you a glimpse of real vulnerability and then they take it back. It might be something small, like admitting they've been thinking about you more than usual, or acknowledging that something you said affected them in a way they didn't expect. Or it might be something deeper, something that reveals a fear, a hesitation, a truth they don't usually let anyone see. And in that moment, it can feel like a breakthrough, like you're finally seeing the part of them that's been hidden behind all the distance and control. But just as quickly as it appears, it fades. They shift away from it, either by changing the subject, pulling back emotionally, or reestablishing a sense of distance. And that can hurt. It can feel like something real was offered and then taken away. But what's important to understand is that this isn't a game, it's not manipulation, it's fear. Because vulnerability for them isn't just uncomfortable, it's risky. It threatens the very sense of control they rely on to feel safe. So even when they want to open up, even when they feel the pull to be closer, there's a part of them that reacts by pulling back. Not because they don't care, but because they care in a way that feels unfamiliar and overwhelming. And this is where the emotional intensity of this phase really begins to settle in. Because by now, you've felt enough to know that something real is happening, that this isn't just another cycle of inconsistency or distance. There's depth here, there's intention. There's a process unfolding that has the potential to change everything. But at the same time, there's still no guarantee of what the outcome will be, and that's what makes it so difficult to navigate. You're connected to something meaningful, but you're also standing in uncertainty. You're seeing signs of movement, signs of consideration, signs of emotional struggle, but not yet the decision itself. And in that space, it's easy to lose yourself, to focus so much on what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they might do next, that you start to disconnect from your own emotional needs. You start waiting, analyzing, hoping for clarity that hasn't arrived yet. But what matters here more than anything is recognizing that this process, as significant as it is, isn't just about them, it's about you too, about how you experience this, how you respond to it, how you decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not. Because while they're trying to figure out if they can choose you, there's another question that exists just as powerfully beneath the surface. Are they showing up in a way that feels right for you? Not perfect, not flawless, but real enough, consistent enough, emotionally present enough to meet you where you are? And that question doesn't have to be answered immediately, but it does deserve your attention. Because no matter how complex their process is, no matter how much they're struggling internally, your experience in this connection matters too. And as this phase continues to unfold, everything is slowly moving toward a point where a decision will be made. Not necessarily spoken right away, not necessarily expressed in a way that feels clear or direct, but it will show in the way they move closer or further away, in the way they either deepen the connection or begin to detach from it. And when that moment comes, all of these signs, all of these subtle shifts will start to make sense in a way they didn't before. Because this is what it looks like when an avoidant is standing at the edge of something real. Not certainty, not clarity, but a quiet internal confrontation with what they feel and what they're willing to do about it. As they get closer to a decision, something subtle shifts. They don't pull away, they become more aware of you. They notice the small things, your tone, your pauses, your emotions, even the ones you try to hide. Their attention sharpens, not casually, but intentionally. They're trying to understand how you fit into their world on a deeper level. At the same time, they become more careful with plans. They don't rush anymore. Even small decisions carry weight because they're thinking about the bigger picture. It may feel like hesitation, but they're not disappearing. They're processing. The chaos starts to fade. The mixed signals become quieter, replaced by a steady but heavier energy. It's not fully clear yet, but it feels like things are moving somewhere real. You may also notice hints of the future in how they act, subtle signs that they're thinking beyond the present. That's when you know this has become serious for them. And then the shift happens quietly. Not through words, but through actions. They either move closer with consistency and presence or slowly pull away because they can't stay in between forever. But through all of this, remember, it's not just about their decision, it's about yours too. Whether this connection truly meets you or leaves you waiting for something that never fully comes. Because in the end, you were never just waiting to be chosen, you were choosing to.